Welcome to The Helping Conversation, an exploration and celebration of the practice, art, and science of facilitating trusting, safe, inclusive, and effective helping conversations with others.
Recorded at RockVox Recording and Production Podcast Studios in Rochester, New York. Mouth off at RockVox. RockVox.com. Having enjoyed a 40-year career facilitating his own authentic brand of the helping conversation, your host, executive and recovery coach, Keith Greer.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you once again for making the time to sit in with me on this episode of The Helping Conversation. Last year, I had the opportunity to do a year-long training on the practice of reflective supervision with coaches. And the training put me in a room with coaches from around the world. It was one of the really cool aspects of the training. It was a pretty international group of about 25 of us. And many of the coaches in the room were highly skilled, highly experienced. The folks who facilitated the training, many of them were MCC level coaches, which for those not familiar with our coaching world, that's about as high as you can get in terms of a recognition of your coaching skill and experience. And aside from the skills we learned around how to provide reflective supervision for our colleagues, I had this incredibly wonderful experience because during the course of the year, as we just chatted and got to know each other, almost every single person in the room talked about struggling with imposter syndrome. And that is something I have always struggled with. I am both, I think, confident at what I do, and yet I hear that voice in my head at times. And to hear, it's just one of those confirming moments, to hear colleagues, and many of whom, again, I view as further down the road than I am, share similar experiences and struggles in how we think about ourselves. Sometimes I wonder if it is inherent to the helping world because we are so passionate about doing the work that we do. Sometimes I wonder if it's just inherent to being human beings, that we can feel both pretty confident about ourselves and yet at times struggle. The term imposter syndrome was coined by psychologists in the 1970s and refers to high-achieving individuals who have an inability to internalize their accomplishments and a persistent fear of being exposed as a fraud. Basically, when you experience imposter syndrome, you attribute your achievements to some external fluke instead of your own personal skills, talents, and efforts. You might also feel like you're the odd one out, like you are the one who doesn't belong, which I think I've always struggled with, which is why it was so confirming and comforting to hear many of my colleagues talk about it. Studies show that up to 70% of people have experienced imposter syndrome. It's more common in women than men, and especially in those who are overachievers and perfectionists. If you grew up in an environment that was highly focused on rewards and recognition and highly criticized if that level of achievement wasn't met, you are more likely to feel like an imposter. And because of this, you're most likely to be hit with a bout of imposter syndrome when you embark on new endeavors, such as starting a business or being asked to take on a leadership role, when maybe you have not to this point in time. Imposter syndrome takes the form of fear, anxiety, self-doubt, second-guessing, and a lack of confidence and or self-worth. When there is an imbalance between confidence and competence, issues of either arrogance or imposter syndrome arise. Both types of people need to move toward the other side of the spectrum to get to a place where there is a healthy dose of confidence and humility, also known as confident humility, or, according to Brené Brown from her book, Dare to Lead, she calls it grounded confidence, which I love that concept. The following is from our guest, this morning's guest. It's from her website. I just love this statement, so I pulled it off her website. As a professional in corporate America, I struggled with imposter syndrome and self-doubt about my leadership capabilities. This led to anxiety, overwhelm, working overtime, and sacrificing productivity. Leadership skills are not something we learn in school or get trained how to do. They are not skills one just figures out. I resonate deeply with that statement. That has been my experience personally. It's been my experience in my work. It has been my experience across industries that very often we look at folks, or the system we work in looks at us. We're highly competent at our technical job. And there is this assumption made that, because we are highly competent technically, well, of course we can be leaders. Of course we can move up and now be asked to lead a team. And very often there is a complete lack of understanding and appreciation for the distinct skill set inherent in leadership, and that it needs to be taught, can be taught, and not, as my guest said, just assumed that we have it. So let's get rolling in our conversation today. Let me introduce to you and welcome into the Helping Conversation, Monica Levi. Monica is an executive leadership coach. She works with lawyers and startup leaders to help them get their leadership skills to the next level. She started her career as a corporate attorney and subsequently transitioned into HR leadership with 20 plus years of experience working for large international organizations, including Google, Skadden, Arps, and others, until she started her own leadership coaching practice 5 years ago. Monica holds a JD from Northwestern University and an MBA from Oxford University. So please join me in welcoming into this episode of the Helping Conversation, Monica Levi. Good morning, Monica.
Good morning. Such a pleasure to be here. And thank you for the beautiful intro into what I think is going to be an amazing conversation.
It is. It is so, it just resonates so deeply in me. And again, just from that experience I had last year. So again, thank you for being here. And why don't we just get started and have you, in addition to what I shared, fill our listeners in on what your journey has been and how you have come to do the work that you're doing today.
I'm happy to. And I, being the lawyer that I am, I always want to summarize information. So I'll try to be brief, and please stop me and ask for details on points that might be more interesting. But as you said, I started out my journey as a securities litigation attorney in New York City. And while I loved the nature of the work, I found myself being miserable in the environment. Right. And so I went from one big law firm to a mid-sized law firm, thinking that the nature of the law firm would probably make me happier. And that wasn't the case. So after a few years of practice, I got my MBA in leadership development and transitioned into the work of helping leaders excel and reach their potential, and just purely developing leaders at all levels to excel. I love that work. I love the more immediate impact that I could see from what I did day to day, and how I could, in one brief conversation, truly create change in someone's trajectory, their potential, their self-belief. So I continued doing that for about 20 years within organizations, primarily law firms, consulting companies, and tech companies, until I moved to Austin and launched my own coaching business. And I got certified by 2 different organizations, a leadership coaching certification and then a life coach coaching certification, which I think blend beautifully in giving me the different modalities that I now use and both on myself and my clients to create incredible impact. I absolutely love what I do. I could have never imagined this trajectory. When I left law, I felt lost and ridden with guilt and insecurity and a lot of uncertainty, and it all worked out. I could not have seen it looking forward, but now in retrospect, looking backwards, all the pieces make a lot of sense. Yeah. So happy to be here and talk about imposter syndrome or leadership skills, or all the beautiful topics that I know we'll touch upon.
Awesome. So first thing I just really want to highlight, because I just so respect when people do this, to shift and to pivot in one's career and move in a pretty different direction. That is such an innately courageous act, to invest all this time, in your case, in law school and pursuing a career in law, and then say, no, moving in another direction. So I'm just curious what that experience was like.
Yeah, it is a courageous act. And now that I've done it several times, it feels more normal. And I see a lot of younger folks doing it bravely and maybe more naively than we do. But I came from a pretty regimented background. I grew up during communism and came from a family of lawyers and doctors. And I didn't know that opportunities existed outside of the very strict professional world. So when I wasn't happy in law, I resisted my desire to do something else, partially because I felt like I would be disappointing everyone around me. And because that the only identity I have was as a lawyer. So I didn't know what my worth would be. And also at the time, 20 so years ago, there were not a lot of role models of folks leaving law and finding other careers that were interesting, professionally respectable, and, profitable. So I found myself knowing that I needed to make a move, but not knowing what that would be. And my way of sort of navigating that uncertainty and discomfort were to get another graduate degree. So I felt like if I got an MBA, then I would have additional, validation to go and pursue other interests. I don't think that's needed for folks trying to do the same move now. There are many, many ways, and mostly relating to mindset into approaching career change later in life or at any stage when you feel like you're leaving a safe job. But that was my path, and it worked to get me comfortable that I had, if I were not going to be a lawyer, I had other usable skills that I could lean on.
Yeah.
But I don't necessarily recommend that for clients that I work with now. We explore much quicker and less financially burdensome options.
And this is just something I'm personally curious about. And I do believe this is relevant to leadership, because I think this is one of those narratives that leaders need to be thoughtful about. I'm curious, because I hear a bit of an accent in your voice. Were there cultural and ethnic components to this is the direction I need to move in, and you start that direction and you don't leave?
Yeah, well, absolutely. That was true for me. So I grew up in Bulgaria most of my childhood during communism, and it was very much accepted and unquestionable that you get the best education you can and you make as much money as you can and you have a reputable job. Yeah. And when I moved to the States, I was exposed to other ways of thinking and more diversity. And I was starting to question some of my beliefs, but that didn't come quickly or easily. And so as I considered leaving law, there's a lot of guilt, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of shame that I had to grapple with, and not really any support that I had at the time. I didn't have a coach. I didn't have a mentor. I didn't have anyone that I could see who had left law that had done it successfully. So I had to kind of create my own path. And interestingly enough, and I teach this now with my clients, once we believe in ourselves, others do too. Yes. And so we just have to figure out our own fears, our own limiting beliefs, and create a path forward. So when I left, my parents were supportive because they saw me happy. All the people that I feared disappointing were 100% on board. The fear that I had that people wouldn't respect me because I didn't have the title of a lawyer. Right. All of that, once I cleared my own internal insecurity, everything aligned. But everything we fear others judging us for is our own insecurity. It reflects what we fear within ourselves. So when I thought, how am I going to meet other people at parties and talk about what I did for a living, when I was so uncomfortable with what my new title represented, once I got comfortable with my own worth and value, none of those things were an issue. So 100% our insecurities reflect what we think other people will judge us for.
Yeah. I really want to highlight this because this comes up all the time in my conversations with folks who work in the space of leadership, the importance of leaders being self-aware, of understanding themselves, of being willing to do their work, of dealing with the insecurities, the stories, the assumptions, the narratives that run through our head and heart, many of which don't work for us, don't move us forward, especially during times of transition. That's really important work. And so I'm curious to dig into some of your work. Do you find that there is a greater acceptance with the leaders that you work with to do that work, or is there still a bit of ambivalence and about going there?
Oh, that's such a good question. I find that no matter who I work with across different industries, level of experience and success, we all have imposter syndrome. Yeah. And so recognizing and normalizing it is a huge first step. I have a 7-step process that I help my clients with who struggle with imposter syndrome, but I always make it clear that nothing's gone wrong. If you have self-doubt and imposter syndrome, I explain why it happens, what it represents, and how we navigate it, but it never goes away because we never stop growing and putting ourselves out of our comfort zone, which is when imposter syndrome comes up. But sometimes it's paralyzing, and I help leaders become more comfortable with managing it, understanding it, and taking steps to manage it. Once we get there, folks are usually, sometimes even if they're resistant to being self-aware and changing some of those limiting beliefs, once they see the impact of the work, they open up. But I see, again, different clients are different. Some people are very open, very ready to do the work, very self-aware. And there are others who are a little bit more arrogant and don't seek coaching because they want to grow. They see coaching because someone told them. The investor in the startup is suggesting that coaching is a great resource, or there might be that their boss might be signaling that this is something they need to pursue. So when someone comes to coaching as a remedial action, or because it was suggested by someone else, they're a little bit closed off in the beginning. They feel like they don't need anything. They got it. They're arrogant in their status quo, and they want to keep it. So the work there is to show them results patiently. And once they see that, they open up to the incredible impact that coaching creates.
Yeah. And the gift to self. The gift to self of being willing to do that work, to go there, to deal with that vulnerability and the intimacy of that conversation with self about who we are. So let me back up a second, because I always ask this question early on, because I am a believer that it is not a coincidence that those of us in the helping world are in the helping world. So if I knew you when you were a kid, who were you? What were you about? What were maybe some going on in your life that was evidence that you were destined to be in the helping world?
I've never thought about this question, and I don't know that I feel destined to be a helper. I feel 100% aligned. This is the one profession, the one type of work that makes me happy and at peace and excited and, willing to overcome all the challenges. Yeah. So I feel in alignment. I'm not sure that I feel destined, but that's probably just the way a definition of this expectation for me. But as a young child, I grew up in a pretty tumultuous home with lots of, trauma. Yeah. Without going into detail, it was not a very, it was a safe place, but it was not a comfortable place. And so I grew up thinking that I had to solve the problems. I had to be the one that figured out the solution, had to be there for my mother, had to be there for my brother. And so I became the helper at a very, very, very young age. And I have, in reflection upon my childhood and how I am as a professional, I see that I'm the person in my community, whether it's friends, family, colleagues, that I'm the one that they turn to for advice, for solutions. And I have embraced this role, and it does make sense that I'm now in a profession where I help people find solutions. But coaching is very, very different from giving advice. Yes. I help clients find their own solutions. So there's a little bit of confusion oftentimes when people think that in coaching, I give advice or I give solutions. We don't do that. We help the client find their own solution. So it's a beautiful alignment with the role I've played as a young child and young adult, but it's a different angle in what I do now. Yeah.
I stopped being amazed a long time ago how often that comes up in conversation when people call folks like you and I and maybe want to do some work with us, the absolute misconception of what a coach is and isn't. And often it is built on this belief that we're the people who hold the wisdom and we're going to tell you what to do. And as you just said, it's the complete opposite. We help people find their own wisdom.
And if I may add here, I think that's a beautiful distinction because we believe that our clients are incredibly capable, that they don't need our hand holding, and we don't teach them anything. We truly enable them to have all these solutions all along. They don't need us in the room to make the right decision. They don't need us for the rest of their life to have the impact that they want to create. So I find that to be a beautiful distinction that between coaching and consulting, for example, or coaching or mentoring, for example. Yeah.
I without getting too uppity, I think it's one of the gifts we bring. It's one of the gifts we bring into the room as a coach is we see people as whole and resourceful and brilliant, and they have their own answers, even at a moment in their life when they swear they don't. We believe that they do, and we will be patient enough and listen deeply and ask really good questions and do those things that we're trained to do that allow a person's internal wisdom to shine. So yeah, it's such an important distinction. So fill us in a little bit, Monica, on some of the work that you do, what you bring to it, you talked about a multi-step model that you employ. As you know, I'm really interested in the how. When you get hired to do some work around leadership, what is it exactly that you bring to the folks that you do your work with?
So it's a multi-tiered answer because that's the beauty of coaching. It's very customized to the client. But in the broadest of sense, I help lawyers and leaders in startups be successful, accelerate their results, be in control of their time, their results, and their careers. Okay. So I work with the client to create a strategy that's very customized for them, understanding their starting point. I often use the analogy of when we have a goal, we're so focused on getting there that we rarely take the time to examine where we're starting at. And so if you put an address in your GPS, but you don't put your starting point, you're going to have a hard time getting there as effectively, as efficiently as needed. And so I do take time to understand what's the starting point of the client, and then create the best strategy to get to their goal as quickly as possible. And I create a plan that's targeted to their specific challenges. So I work with leadership skills. So when you're managing a team for the first time, or you're getting up to a new level of leadership position, you have to know how to delegate effectively. What's your zone of genius and how to delegate or eliminate everything else. You have to know how to give feedback effectively to get your team to meet expectations. You have to know how to empower employees, how to build trust, how to communicate effectively. You have to know how to navigate difficult conversations. You have to know how to create trust with investors, with clients, with employees. You also have to battle your own imposter syndrome. So that's a topic of huge interest to me. I've studied it for 20 years. I've suffered from it incessantly. And so I have a 7-step process for managing imposter syndrome, but that's just one of many, many things that I work with my clients on. But it is a pretty common pattern. It does come across, like I said, every type of client, regardless of their experience or seniority or success. So that's a common thread. Taking control of your results. We often look to others. We assign blame. We look to external circumstances in the economy, and we blame our challenges on those things that we don't have control to change. So we lose our agency in creating a solution. So I help my clients take full responsibility for the solution, regardless of what caused the problem. It doesn't help to say, well, it's not my fault, it's my client's fault, because that doesn't give you the power to create a solution if you're looking to someone else to create that. Yeah. So those are some of the things that I work on.
So I wanted to jump on something you said a moment ago. I just love this statement. I just wrote it down and put quotes around it. What is your zone of genius? So talk a little bit about that. What's that conversation like with folks?
Yeah. So we often find that when we move at the very basic level from an IC, individual contributor, to leading a team, we have to shift how we think about where we add value. We no longer are responsible for getting everything done. We're responsible for enabling and empowering others to get things done. And so the way you focus your time shifts. And for a lot of folks, that transition is difficult because we're perfectionists and we don't trust others to do a job well. Or we think that their mistake is going to impact our reputation. So we hold on to things very tightly. We have a hard time releasing that control and developing trust, or we don't trust ourselves to have the right skill set to ensure that others can do a job well, or we don't have the time to delegate a whole slew of issues. And then as you move up the ranks, your zone of genius changes. What you do best and where you should spend most of your time changes with every new level of responsibility. And so the folks have to stop doing what they did up until now to succeed, to get to the next level, and do something else to create different results. And let's think about this. You've been successful for 20 years and you get into a high level of new leadership responsibility. What got you to success up until now? A lot of that has to go for you to get to the next level. And naturally, it's human to want to hold on to those skills and to have a hard time letting go. So one is the awareness, recognizing your zone of genius. Where do you create the most impact? and being comfortable laser focusing your time doing that one or two things, and truly letting the rest of it be done by other folks, or understanding what you need to automate or eliminate from your day. That creates tremendous impact, but a lot of folks just overwork and hustle because they want to keep it all on their plate.
Right. So I'm curious about this. I was just having this conversation with someone earlier. I'd be curious on your take. So I'm with you on everything you're saying about, all right, so I now move into a position of leadership. I need to rethink where my time and energy goes, focus on something a bit more specific, be willing to share, be willing to trust the people on my team. But I'm curious from your experience, what the impact of the greater system is on that. Because what I hear often from leaders is that the message they're getting from above, up the hierarchy, is we do expect you to do everything. We expect you to be in control of everybody. We expect you to know what's going on. And then when someone like me walks in and has a similar conversation that you're talking about, it feels like a different conversation for them from what they're hearing within the system. And so I'm just curious about that with you. Is that something you're seeing, the impact of the larger system on how a person views their role as a leader?
That is a really, really good point. So for the most part, I work with folks who are founders and leaders of companies, CEOs, so they don't have that challenge, but it is 100% true that oftentimes there's conflicting messages. Yeah. And so I would coach the person around having the right conversation. So what is the outcome that we want to create? And so maybe the vision of their leader or their boss is, you take care of everything. So my client's goal is to have the right conversation to understand, okay, my boss sees the outcome that they want through these processes. Let me focus on the outcome and then decide, okay, maybe we can get to that outcome, but not the way you have envisioned it, you boss. There are other ways in which I suggest we get to that outcome. And then the other piece is, yes, if I'm in a leadership position, it is my responsibility to know what's happening on my team to make sure it happens, not by doing it myself, but by having the right processes, conversations to enable my team by hiring the right people and then managing the right people in a way that enables them to create the outcome. But oftentimes when I see that kind of challenge, it's a lack of open communication. It's a lack of understanding the expectations and unveiling some of the assumptions that people have around how the outcome will be achieved. Yeah. And so it just takes coaching the client around how to have the right conversation.
Right. I really want to highlight the word you just used, because I think for me, it's such an important word to listen for as you do the kind of work that we do, which is what people's assumptions are. Right? So for those that are listening who are maybe new to the helping world, we all operate on assumptions, and very often those assumptions are incredibly limiting, both about self and others. So for you to tune your ear as you're talking with folks to what assumptions are behind how this person operates and what's working for them and what isn't.
That is the core of coaching, period, is to highlight to our clients what assumptions, what beliefs, what prior experiences they're bringing into the current situation, and not to make them wrong, but to open up their mind to what other possible interpretations there are of the facts so that they can make the best decision possible. And in the business world, the biggest problems come from assumptions, unexpressed expectations. There's a saying in the coaching world that an expectation is resentment in the making, especially if the expectation is unexpressed. And for the most part, we don't express that expectations in the business world. And so that is, coaching can really highlight that gap and help you close it.
Can you say that again? I love that.
An expectation is resentment in the making, especially if the expectation is unexpressed.
Wow. Yeah. Right. We just assume somehow magically somebody's going to know it, right? We don't give voice to it.
What's clear to us should obviously be common sense to everyone else, but that's rarely the case. And if we open up just our curiosity to allow for different people to come from different places and angles and perspectives, that right there is 50% of the solution.
Yeah. Look, Monica, I've always believed that the world would be a much better place if everybody thought exactly like I do, right?
Well, you're not wrong. But that makes 7 billion of us.
Yeah, right. Which is why as soon as there's more people in the room than just me, it's an assumption that doesn't work. It just doesn't work well. That's great. And expectation is a resentment in the making, especially when not expressed. Yeah, that's powerful. So I'm thinking a lot of your work is helping to identify maybe what some of those expectations are or assumptions and figuring out how to bring them into the light of day.
100%. That is the core of coaching. Oftentimes when folks come to me or to any coach, they're looking for the how. They're looking for the strategy. Like, if I'm going to tell me how to do it. And that's where we talk about the difference between consulting and coaching. Of course, there's strategy in what we do as coaches. Of course, there are things that we teach our clients because we've done it many, many times before. But if strategy were alone were enough, we'd all be fit and in shape. And we know that we're not. We know that many of us struggle with weight, and we know that knowing how to lose weight is a common knowledge. Information is cheap. It's available everywhere. The how or the strategy is very easy to find. There are tons of books and courses. Coaching does beautifully is give you the strategy, but then also create the mindset and the accountability and support to apply that strategy, because it's in the execution of the strategy where we fall short. The mindset that we lack to execute the strategy for our own set of unique circumstances. So strategy is incredibly important. It's a piece of the puzzle, but it's a small piece of the puzzle. And in coaching, we give you the strategy and the execution, and we give you the support and accountability to get to the result. So that's why, I don't know how I got on this topic or why I'm talking about this, but I'm a huge believer that there's a lot of lack of understanding of what coaching is supposed to provide. Yes. And so when people come to us and say, give me the how, I want the how. Yes, you have the how, but what's more important is the mindset. Yeah. So a lot of what we do is uncover these limiting beliefs, uncover the assumptions and the expectations, not because we are smarter or more of an expert in your field, but because we have a neutral sounding board perspective that we can look at the way you're presenting a set of facts or a problem, and we can pinpoint very easily, hey, there's all of these assumptions that you're coming into this problem with, because we have that neutral perspective. Yeah.
Before I came to coaching, I came out of the therapy world, and in the therapy world, we talk about the concepts of transference and countertransference. And countertransference for you as the helping person is that stuff. It's my stuff. It's the assumptions. I use the term who walks in the room, who from my past walks in the room and gets in the way of my good work because I project that on to other people. And I think for me, my bias would be at the end of the day, that's the nuts in doing good leadership work is our own level of self-awareness.
Yes. And as coaches, the majority of training we have is how to show up completely neutrally, how to have no judgment of the client, no matter what they present with. And that is why coaching is not an easy skill. Not everyone can listen neutrally and without judgment and ask questions without leading the client into what they think the answer should be. That's the core of the coaching skill.
Yeah. I'll share a quick story that I don't share this very often out in public. When I started my coach training 20 plus years ago, part of what so attracted me to it was what you were just talking about, that there's this vibe in coaching that we don't have anybody's answers. Everybody has their own answers. And I came from a pretty traditional clinical upbringing, so to speak, where I got a bit of a message that I'm supposed to be the expert. I'm supposed to make change happen. And when I started reading about coaching and thinking about doing the training, I was thinking, oh, I love this. This is so what I'm looking for. And so I start my coach training, and boy, what a kick in the pants I had, because I realized as I started the training how much I loved being the expert, that there's an ego thing involved in that, and that this piece in coaching that you're eloquently talking about requires us to leave our ego at the door, that we don't have people's answers. We don't know. We can barely keep our own you-know-what together most days. And what a gift that is, not only to the people we work with, but to us. It's one of the reasons I think I'm here 40 years into the career and more passionate about it than I've ever been, was reaching that realization of, Keith, you don't need to be the expert. You don't want to be the expert. People know their stuff.
I love that. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah. So you walk into a room with somebody you're about to start working with, and very strong interest area of mine is how we perceive each other as friend or foe, how we create trust and safety and a sense of inclusion. So what are some thoughts that are bumping around inside you, upon first meeting with somebody, knowing you're about to invite them into this very potentially vulnerable and intimate conversation around bringing a really nice level of trust and safety and inclusion into the room as quickly as you can?
Yeah, I think that is a non-negotiable for a coach to be able to be successful. And I'm lucky that in my 20 years of leadership development experience, I was in the HR world. So that was a skill that I've built very successfully. And some of it, I think, is a natural strength of mine. I have that calming energy. And I also have that completely non-judgmental presence. I can hold space for everyone to bring up anything to the table. And so I think as a coach, we are able to signal to the client, you can bring anything to the table. Nothing will shock me. Nothing will surprise me. And I got you. I got you no matter what. We'll have a solution. And because I truly believe in that, not just for me, but as a coach in general, because the coaching modality is so incredibly impactful, I genuinely lead with that energy. And even the most arrogant and closed off clients eventually see that this is not about one being wrong, the other one telling the other person what to do. It's about coming in vulnerably, talking about everything that's going on for you. And we are in a partnership to find a solution. And like you said, this is not about the ego of me being a great coach or of having a solution. Right. So when I show up with zero expectations of what the solution is or what the answers are, zero expectation of how the coaching session will unfold, and zero judgment of putting away all of my own beliefs and expectations, at the door, I'm a blank slate, and that helps the client really build that trust.
Yeah. I hear, and this goes back to my social work days, I hear that unconditional positive regard, right? That you walk into the room and I see the best in you. I'm listening to your story. Teach me about your story. I don't know anything about your story. I have no assumptions about your story. The other term you use, and I just love this, and I always highlight this when my guests use this concept, is holding space. That may be one of the greatest gifts we give as coaches and other helping people as well, is we hold this space. We hold this safe space where you can do your exploration, be curious, be thoughtful, make mistakes, identify and address those assumptions. And that even within that space, I personally love the word spaciousness. It's a spacious space that allows all this work to be done between two human beings. And that we should not ever take lightly, because that is a monumentally intimate experience.
That's beautifully said. Yes. And as you're speaking, what came to mind is that we will always be our client's biggest ally. Yes. We will believe in them and what's possible for them more passionately and feverishly than anyone else in their life may have up until now. And that doesn't mean that we agree with everything you say or you want. Oftentimes we will have the hardest conversations with you. We will say things that other people may not be willing to say. And that is all in support of your dream and what's possible for you. And so holding space doesn't mean we are soft or agreeable. We will challenge you, but in a way that supports and in belief of what's possible for you.
Yeah. A long time ago, somebody asked me to describe coaching, and this is the silly thing that popped into my head. I said, if somebody called me and said, Keith, I want to hire you as my coach, and my goal is to build a pair of wings and fly to the moon, that my job in that conversation at that moment would be to say, that sounds freaking awesome. Let's get moving. Yes. Now, either they're going to do it, which who knows, or as you said, there might be moments where part of my role will be to be honest, to ask good questions, to get curious with them, maybe shift if that doesn't. But who am I? Who would I be to say, no, you can't do that?
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah. It's such a good, cool piece of what we do.
Yes.
All right.
I feel it.
Part of this work, as you're describing, that you do with the folks that you work with. Well, let me back up for a second. I want to ask a question and I'll forget if I move on. I know this is a really, really general question, so I apologize ahead of time. You have chosen very specifically to work with attorneys and startups. What is it about those two groups of people that jazzes you and excites you to the point where this is who I want to work with?
That is a great question. And again, I can't say that a lot of this was 100% intentional, but I found startups in Austin, or they found me when I launched my coaching business, because I've done so much in my life and my own trajectory and growth that startups go through. And so my experience related to what a lot of those folks are building or going through, the uncertainty, the having to make big decisions with no time or no clear right answer, right. Knowing how to navigate a lot of that and build a team from 5 to 100 in 1 year. So the big scaling, a lot of the things that I have done related to what startups were looking for guidance with. So that made a lot of sense. And then because of my prior network of attorneys, that was just always available, and folks found me and started working with me. And I could see that initially I was a little resistant, having left that part of my professional life behind me. I was resistant to work with lawyers, but I see how needed this work is for lawyers. I see how much pain they go through. Being in the legal industry is not for everyone. It's a pretty stressful position. And so I know what I would have needed the time when I was a lawyer, if that were available, would have made my experience very different. And so I want to be the person that makes it better for them, that is offering the support that I would have loved to have. And so because there's so much need, and I know I can help, have this huge opening in my heart for they need me, and I could be that person for them. And so once I opened up to that, it clicked. I have half of my client base is lawyers, and they could be lawyers in-house. They could be partners in a law firm. They could be non-practicing lawyers, but there's an understanding that I have for the way lawyers think, the way we approach problems, the way we show up in the world, that helps me be really helpful for them. Right.
Awesome. All right. So and you are illustrating this wonderfully in our conversation today. And that is that one of the other gifts I believe we bring as coaches is we're strength-based. We see the best in people. We treat people as their own best resource. And so I'm always really curious with my guests to be that way with themselves. So I always give my guests a few minutes to brag about themselves. What are some of your personal strengths, talents, skills, positive attributes, both personally and professionally that you, let's just say, you bring to the world?
Oh, are you asking that question of me?
To you, yes.
Oh, I thought you were just giving me an example of how you approach your coaching. Well, I think I'm an incredible coach. I love the impact I create. I am pretty disciplined and will persevere through any challenge to get to my goal. Is a just signal of success for me is, again, I grew up in communism. I left home when I was 17, completely on my own, left everything I knew, came to the US. Before the time of email, I was completely unable to communicate with loved ones. So I felt there was a big shift and change that I had to overcome for 4 years of, isolation, or, didn't necessarily fit in with where I went to college, and felt I went from a social butterfly to being kind of a loner, and went to a great law school. I have created incredible success for me professionally and financially. I get to support my family. I have an incredible network of friends, a community that I love, that I contribute tremendously to. And then my clients, I've changed lives. I've saved marriages. I've created impact in organizations that are changing the world. And I, even through what seems like a minor piece of the puzzle, I feel incredibly honored that I get to do that work on my own terms with people I love. And just I've created a great life that I couldn't have seen when I was this young teenager in Bulgaria during communism. I could have never imagined that I will have what I have today. Thank you for this question.
I love hearing that. Because we know that there's this narrative alive and well in our culture that we're, that if you were to list off what you just listed, that somehow we're being boastful or full of ourselves, versus no, just confident, comfortable, humble, but recognizing that our work has impact and significant value on a whole lot of different levels.
Thank you for bringing this up, because I have, and I teach this to my clients. I think there's over focus in our society on humility.
Oh, gosh,
and I make a distinction between confidence and arrogance. Yes. And I think that confidence is knowing what you're good at and taking responsibility and credit for your accomplishments, whereas arrogance is thinking that you're better than.
Yes.
Arrogance is being confident and better than others. So I never certainly would encourage anyone to be arrogant. Your confidence, your success is for you in relation to you. Your goal is for success in your definition, not in being better than others in any capacity.
Right. Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. I'm just in our kind of work, I'm always curious about it because it does seem to be so challenging for people to comfortably and humbly say, I just think it is, here's the tools in my toolkit. And here's what I get to call on as a human being, especially maybe during times of life when things are challenging. But boy, is it hard, because that narrative is you're being boastful, full of yourself, egotistical. And I agree with you. There's such a difference between humbly confident and arrogant. We know the difference. Yeah. So I love it. Congratulations to you. I love hearing people talk about recognizing the impact of your work and being comfortable saying your work has impact, and that people are walking around the earth thankful that they worked with Monica.
Yeah, thank you for that. I do teach my clients a lot of things that I have to go first. Whatever I encourage them to do and I teach them, I've been there maybe one step ahead of them, but I have to go first. And if I can't live what I teach, then I'd be a poor example.
Yeah. The other thing I wonder about with that, Monica, is because I'm with you 100% that this is, once again, we can talk about this in terms of leadership. We can also talk about this in terms of our role as coaches, our responsibility to do our own work and to be self-aware and to be curious about ourselves. How important that is in our work, and that by doing that, I believe, it allows us to be authentic. And when I think of the feedback I think I probably get a lot is that would be one that I seem to come across as authentic. I'm real, I'm genuine, there's not a lot of errors there. And that, I think that for me, I know works for me in terms of back to that trust and safety, that when I sit with another human being, their first read on me is pretty good dude, pretty laid back, pretty real. And I like to think that comes from doing a lot of my own work, like you're talking about.
Yeah, I love that. That's beautiful quality.
Yeah, it seems to resonate with most people, right? Because most of us, our bullshit meter is pretty good. Right? Mm-hmm. We know when we're in front of somebody that doesn't feel real.
Yeah, and coaching is a chemistry fit, right? You're going to talk to a number of coaches. You have to find what feels right for you. There is no right coach for, everyone.
Yeah. And I would even go one step down the road for us as coaches, for us to figure out, I always use the word art. Like coaching it's a practice, there's science behind it, but there's an art to it. And that's where we all get to decide, how do I uniquely do my art?
Mm-hmm. Beautifully said. Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Awesome. So to you, in maybe in that vein, you've already talked about it a little bit, but maybe a bit more specifically, what are some of the greatest benefits to you of doing this kind of work?
They're twofold. They're one, when I found coaching, my own life changed, my own business changed, my own relationships changed. And having that training, I can self-coach. I can always do the work on myself and continue to evolve. And I certainly have coaches, because you can't see the label from inside the jar. Like I have all my own limitations to spotting my limitations or my limiting beliefs, but I am quicker at knowing when I need help and being able to do some of the work on myself. And then the second benefit is just the impact that I have. When I was a lawyer, I would often work on a case for 6 months to a year before I could see results. And now I can have a singular conversation and create transformation, or within 3 months, there's incredible transformation. So having that fulfillment of the impact of my work over and over again is a blessing that it makes every day worthwhile.
Yeah. Yeah. So by the way, I'm going to steal from you. You can't see the label from inside the jar. I'm putting that on a t-shirt. That has to be on a t-shirt. That is a wonderful, wonderful statement.
If I can't invest in my own coaching, then why would I expect my clients to?
Right.
And I absolutely cannot. And I would dare to bet money that the most masterful coaches who have the most experience still need a coach.
Always.
Help them.
Always.
Just like the best surgeon in the world cannot operate on themselves. And so we need the same level of care and work that we provide to clients.
Yeah. Awesome. What would you say in are some of the more challenging aspects of your work?
Oh, you have all the best questions, Keith. Things that have not been asked before. I think the business aspect is still something that I have to do 50% of the time. And I wish I could just coach 100% of the time. So realizing that it is a business, I have to love it as I would any professional endeavor. And I have to dedicate time to it, not with resentment, but with expectation that it's a partnership. Right. So that's something that I continue to learn. I think I mentioned this briefly before, but sometimes I get clients who are sent my way a little bit, with resistance. And so it takes a little bit of time to get them to open up and see the benefit of the work and not have to feel like they just have to check the box for the organization to, know that they've done coaching. So that's where I struggle with. I typically sometimes say no to these assignments because I always feel like the coaching relationship is driven, the agenda is driven by the client. So if they come in resisting it, it's hard to establish a goal that they're committed to. I'd say those are the challenges. For the most part, nothing else comes to mind.
Okay. All right. And somewhat related to that, because our work, I had a student, I did school social work for a lot of years. I had a student many years ago who, this really cool 15, 16-year-old kid was sitting in my office one day and said, God, Mr. Greer, your job is so easy. All you do is sit around and listen. And that stays with me to this day. It just tickled me so. But I do believe sometimes it is how people view this work that we do, right? That it's, it's not that rigorous, but it is. So what are some of your strategies for keeping yourself well?
Okay. Well, I have always prioritized physical and mental health. Somehow, subconsciously, that's been something that was important to me. And even when I was a lawyer, I worked 100-hour weeks. I would find ways to go to the gym and eat well and take time for a walk. So currently, I obviously have a lot more freedom and I get to choose how to spend my time. So I meditate daily. I work out 6 times a week. I spend time in nature. I live in beautiful Austin, Texas. I live right by the lake. So I take at least 30 minutes to walk by the lake if it's not 100 degrees, which it has been. And I connect with people that I love and have beautiful conversations that enrich me. And so I have beautiful friends, great family. And so those are the things that I prioritize, at least on a weekly basis.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Have you had... is there opportunity to get back to your homeland?
I was back home actually a few months ago. Yes. Despite the situation in Kiev had been on my mind. And I was considering not going, but I have a grandma who's 90, just turned 95, and my dad's still there. And my brother and my niece and nephew were not far from there. So I did go a few months ago, and it's always lovely. But interesting enough, when you say that, this feels like home because I've been in the States for much longer. So home is here and I love it, but homeland is a good way to say it. I do try to go back a couple of times, every few years. Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome. If someone was listening, Monica, and let me ask this question specifically. If someone was listening and was already somewhere down the path of their career and hears that voice in their head about, this isn't for me, and maybe isn't quite sure what is, but knows that the present path isn't for them and is contemplating starting to do something with that conversation, what would your words of wisdom be to them?
Call me.
Awesome.
But joking aside, you have permission to do what makes you happy.
Yeah.
And the first inkling that there's something out there is enough for you to swing and getting clarity. And it doesn't have to be 100. You don't have to see the full path. Just take one step at a time to create more clarity, and all the shoulds and what the societal expectations, just question them and be open to find your own truth. But we oftentimes don't even give ourselves permission to do that. So start with permission. I give it to you. You have it.
Yeah.
Keep asking those questions.
It's always fascinating to me when I've been in those conversations with people that some of what seems to historically hold them back is the feeling that if I were to even voice this to another human being, that it would mean somehow tomorrow I have to make decisions. And they kind of put themselves almost in fight flight. It's too big, it's too much, it's too soon, versus, as you're saying, just give yourself permission to ask those questions, to be in a conversation with somebody about it, without, you're not making any commitment to move anywhere by the middle of tomorrow. But that first step of just your own internal permission that it's okay for me to be contemplating this.
Yeah, that is a beautiful point, Keith, because many of us see things as black or white, two extremes. Once I open up that can of worms, I have to make a decision. I have to commit. And it's either or, as opposed to there's a continuum.
Yes.
And there's a process. And it does feel overwhelming if you are first starting to explore this, which is why working with a coach could be so helpful to navigate the change process or even the clarity process. But it doesn't have to be, if you're able to recognize, okay, I can always come back to where I'm at. Right. Let me just explore it one question at a time, one step at a time, one informational interview at a time. Sometimes we feel like, wow, I don't trust myself to X, Y, and Z. We have agency over our own behavior.
Yeah. I had a conversation last year with a kind of middle-level manager person that I was working with, and she was not very happy in her position and was starting to think about, do I look elsewhere? And it was a fascinating conversation around the difficulty she was having just giving herself permission to look. We're not quitting your job. You're not running off. Just to start to look, to do some research. What's else out there? The worry that created and feeling disloyal. I remember her using that word. If I even look, Keith, am I being disloyal? The assumptions, again, back to that word, that she operated upon that limited her ability to get curious about herself, about what else might be out there. They were powerful. It took a lot of work to get through that.
Yeah. That happens very, very often. And so I hope people who hear this and relate to it, you have a human brain. There's nothing wrong with you having those fears. But I want to offer, I actually put together a freebie for your listeners, for your audience. This decision-making is something that we struggle with. It's not easy. And I have a framework, a decision-making framework that I use, that I take my clients through. Beautiful. And it's available through my Instagram, which is Monica M. Levi. So Monica M is in Monica, Levi, Levi. And under my bio, there's two freebies. One is a productivity one, and the second one is a decision-making formula. I'd love for you, everyone who's interested, to take advantage of that. Awesome.
So I will make sure, for folks who are listening, in the podcast description notes, you will get Monica's Instagram. You will get Monica's, in the notes will be her website, monicalevicoaching.com. And Monica, let's just make sure anything else you want in your social media world, anything like that, make sure that I have that, and we will get that into the podcast description.
Those are great. My most active social media presence is on LinkedIn. So Monica Levi with an I. I do post daily and try to add a lot of value, a lot of practical, applicable tips for folks who follow me. So feel free to follow me there.
Beautiful.
And engage in a conversation. Let me know what you want to hear more of, what your next goal or challenge is, and I'd love to help. I love providing value as much as I can. I have a newsletter that you can sign up for. If you get any of my freebies, I'll add you to my newsletter.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I don't think you and I are connected on LinkedIn. I'm going to make sure that we connect there.
Oh boy, we have to change that.
Sure that make sure we connect there. But I will make sure all of that information are a part of the podcast notes and description that comes along with listening to this episode. Monica Levi, thank you so much. What a wonderful conversation, and thank you for the amazing work and the meaningful work that you're out there doing and helping people move along.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for the great questions. It's been a pleasure.
Great. Good. We will make sure that maybe somewhere down the road, we'll do a part 2 and see how things are going.
Anytime. Let's do it.
Such an important conversation that you are in with folks. Such an important conversation. Again, as we started the conversation 60 minutes ago, too often, people either don't give themselves permission to move forward, get stuck behind their assumptions, or in the world of leadership, are thrust into roles of leadership and haven't been given the training and the coaching support that they need. Go ahead.
This is, as you were speaking, there's a message that I want to leave your audience with. Yes. And a better life is possible, whether it's professionally or personally, no matter what your current situation is, a better life is possible. So please, please, please don't ever give up or lose hope.
Yeah.
Whether you reach out to a coach or you find additional resources, just know that change is possible for you.
Yeah. Don't settle for less. Don't settle for being somewhere
life
where
it's supposed to be beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you, Monica. So enjoyed this.
Likewise.
All right, folks, thank you for being with us today, and I hope you found the conversation as meaningful as I did. Again, all of Monica's contact information will be in the podcast notes. Please reach out to her if you think that she is somebody that you would like to be in this conversation with. And I thank you again for being here with us, and I invite you to join us for the next episode as we continue to shine a light on the skill and talent of those individuals that invite another into that compassionate, complex, and intimate space called the helping conversation. Have a great day, everyone.
We thank you for sitting in on our discussion today on just one unique version of the helping conversation. We would love to hear your thoughts on today's podcast, so we sincerely invite you to follow, rate, and most importantly, review our episodes. For more information on Keith Greer and this podcast, log on to keithgreercoaching.com. Please join us for our next episode as we continue the exploration and celebration of the practice, art, and science of the helping conversation.